Hello and welcome to $5 Flicks. My name is Michael Willer, and today we're going to be doing a crash course on directing. This is a massive subject. There's a lot to cover, and I'm going to try and parcel it out into basically categories that might be easy for you to identify what's going to be the most helpful for you, because there are a lot of different kinds of directors, and there are also a lot of different kinds of productions that don't need directors to do certain things, but sometimes you do. It can get really confusing, and basically directing, similar to producing, can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So to kind of break this up in the right way, I think I mentioned last video that I was going to do these in order, during the course of pre-production, production, post-production, and screw that. I'm most interested in certain things, and I kind of want to dive into the ones that I like. And if I had a choice of one thing that I had to do for the rest of my life, it would be directing. I mean, that's the part of filmmaking that I am most in love with, and everything else I've built around it to be able to do the most directing that I can do. So with that being said, there's a lot of different ways to approach this. There's what does a director do during pre-production, during production, post-production, and today I want to focus on what a director does during production, which is while you're on set, while you're actively filming your movie. There's a lot of different parts of this job, and I think I have to focus on the broad strokes of what a director is, because when I first moved to LA, I didn't really know. I knew this is what needs to happen to make a movie, and this is generally the kind of jobs that need to get done, and I would just do most of them myself. And so where does your job line up? Where does it start and stop versus other people's? And then what kinds of sets require you to do more than one job? Because if you're on a union set, you're really defined by this is the thing that you're allowed to do, versus an indie film set or a no budget set where it's kind of just every man for themselves and just try to make the production work. So there are also different kinds of directors, and broadly speaking, I mean, there's a lot of different ways and flavors that people can do this job, but broadly speaking, there's kind of the visionary, who a lot of times they're a writer, director, or they also produce their own work. They have a vision for what they want things to look like, feel like, sound like, and they have a very sort of crafted perspective on the entire medium, particularly from a visual perspective. A lot of times these kind of directors have a shot list for how they want the movie to be put together. Next to that, you a lot of times have the writer producer, who is the creator of the source material and steps into the directing role more out of necessity than necessarily a desire to be a director, be a film director. A lot of times they don't have a lot of knowledge about the visual side of things, cameras, focal lengths, shots, how to put stuff like that together. And a lot of times, even a step more than that, they don't really care. They just want somebody to take care of that and for them to be able to show up and do their thing. So an example of a visionary director from before would be like Steven Spielberg, classic example of a visionary. He's got his entire thing crafted from start to finish. A writer-director, I mean, there's tons of these. The Coen brothers actually work together, I think, because one of them is primarily the writer and the other is primarily the visual/editor director. You also have people like Woody Allen, who started his career almost exclusively as a writer/theater style director, where he really just wanted to work with the actors and would say, just set up a wide shot and roll the camera and we'll just do the scene. And I think he's gotten a little bit more crafted in that sense, but that's sort of an example of like a writer director. And then you also have actor directors who can kind of float in between those two different areas, but typically an actor director, it really is focused on the thing that they know most about, which is the acting and the performance. And a lot of times if they're in their own movie, there's a whole extra sort of set of steps you have to go through to make sure that the movie's being well directed. Because if you're acting and your attention's being pulled that other direction, it can get really tricky, and so you have to a lot of times lean on other people's eye to make sure that this is done this way, an acting coach to make sure that when you're in your own scene that you're being directed by somebody and not trying to come up with your own notes for yourself. So defining the terms a little bit, basically when I moved to LA when I was 21 years old, I had made a bunch of movies, but I hadn't made them properly before. I just was sort of making shit up as I went along. And one of the things that I had to learn the hard way was that I was used to running the camera myself, picking the shots myself, doing all of the cinematography on my own, the lighting, whatever. I didn't do a lot of the lighting, but I had an idea of what I wanted things to look like, even if I couldn't have described it to you. I just sort of knew. And learning what a cinematographer does as distinct from a director and what a producer does as distinct from a director was really helpful. So generally speaking, the director's job on set is to have a plan. What does your film get made of? What are the pieces that your film gets made of? You need the script, obviously. Not necessarily your job to write it, but it can be. You need a shot list. You don't need a shot list, but you really should have one, even if you don't follow it, because you need to be able to show something to all the other people involved in your production and say, this is what we're trying to make. And a lot of times a shot list is the easiest way to communicate that, especially if you're working with an AD who's trying to schedule out your day and say, okay, well, we can do this number of shots or whatever. Having a shot list is really just a smart way to do it. If you don't know, a shot list is what it sounds like. When you think about a scene in a movie and how it's cut together, assuming it has cuts, if there's a one take, then it might not. But every single shot in that scene is something that you had to go plan, right? So, okay, we have a scene of two people sitting in a diner, and I want, the wide shot with two of them on either side of the frame, and then I want close-ups for each of them, but I also want medium, over-the-shoulder shots for each of them too. Well, that's 5 setups right there. That's super traditional coverage, and every one of those different shots goes on your shot list. Walking onto a set, you also need to understand how to be the person with the answers. And this is one of the hardest things to kind of impart onto somebody if they haven't done it before, is as a director, usually you're the glue that's holding the entire team together, whether it's the crew, the actors, the producers. A lot of times the director is the person that everyone's going to be looking to for answers. And on top of that, a lot of times the crew doesn't know each other. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but I would say more often than not, this is the first project that everybody has worked on together, even if you have some friends of friends. And that means that you're the person that everyone has in common. You are probably the one who hired everybody or reached out to them, got them excited, got them on board, and that is an amount of responsibility that you have to carry, and that you have to be excited about, because if there's ever a lull, if there's ever a problem that needs solving, if there's ever a unexpected thing that pops up and or good or bad, oh my God, the sun's breaking through the clouds, but we're set up for this other shot, what should we do? You're the person who's going to have to making those decisions. And that can be a lot of pressure, but that's also really exciting because you'll surprise yourself. You'll have decisions you'll have answers for questions that you had never considered before, and that'll force you to start thinking creatively. Oh my God, this one actor's wardrobe really isn't working out with the lavalier mic, and you wanted to do a oneer, so we can't have a boom mic in there. We have to have a lavalier, but the wardrobe's not working. What do we do? And now you have to come up with an answer for that. You don't have to do it yourself every time. Sometimes you can say to the sound guy, I don't know, what do you think? What's the best way to rig this? Should we put it, through her hair? Can we just use the other does she have enough lines to justify whatever? But you have to be able to ask the right questions and then give answers. If you freeze up on set, it's a lot of pressure, but if you freeze, everybody else stands there waiting and time gets wasted. And filmmaking is all about time. It's about maximizing the most number of shots and the best quality of shots for the amount of time that you've got. So taking that role of leadership is a big deal, especially if you're the person who's got the creative vision. If you wrote the script yourself, people are going to have script questions for you. They're going to take things in a different context than what you're used to. The costume designer is going to say, hey, I know that you said that this one costume is supposed to be aged. How aged do you mean? Is it somebody that's worn it a few times, or is it completely torn and tattered? They're going to say that at the exact same time that an actor is going to come up to you and say, hey, you have this one word of dialogue in here that really sounds weird coming out of my mouth, and I don't know if I can say that authentically, is there some other, and they're going to say, hey, can you rewrite this for me? And then your cinematographer is going to come up to you and say, look, this is partially overcast lighting. The sun's constantly changing, which means my exposure is going to be constantly changing. And we need to figure out a different approach to shoot this scene where, we're not necessarily going to be able to rely on the sunlight as a key light. Maybe you have to come up with a different plan. And all of these things are going to come at you at once. So what I recommend is come to set over-prepared. Have your shot list worked out completely in your head. You don't have to have it memorized. You can have it on a piece of paper in your pocket, and your AD should have one too, at least. And usually I try and bring shot lists for the cinematographer, the AD, myself, the producer, like just be able to have them for people. And that way you just have a clear idea of what this entire thing looks like. Go through the day in your head ahead of time. Make sure okay, we're going to do this first, we're going to do this second. Okay, if we do this scene before this other scene, we just have to remember to get the actors in the right emotional mindset because this actually should have chronologically taken place first. Try and sort all of that stuff out ahead of time, because if you walk onto set over-prepared, then you can take on anything. You may not have immediate answers. Nobody's expecting you to always have immediate answers for everything. But sometimes you just have to make a decision, especially if you feel that time crunch, if you can tell like, oh my God, they're waiting on me, I gotta just say something. Sometimes just saying something, just making some decision is better than nothing. Because who's to say what the right decision is or isn't? A lot of this stuff is creative interpretation. And so that's okay. You can ask for people's advice, absolutely ask for people's advice. Don't fake it so much that people look at you and say like, they don't actually know what they're doing, do they? Like they're just saying a bunch of bullshit and these are conflicting pieces of advice that don't make any sense. Don't always fake it. If you have to ask for more information, absolutely do that. Just pick your battles, because sometimes somebody's just gonna have to say go, and that's almost always gonna be you. So leading by example, part of that is everybody on set, right? Like you should have met everybody well in advance of actually showing up. It is also your job to interact with all those people and to say, I'm walking from set to hair and makeup to ask the actor something and I pass a PA on the way by, like say hi. It's basic stuff, but when you're so busy and you're so distracted on set, you can get fixated on the thing right in front of you, and you kind of forget that you're also there to help make this a fun environment for people. You're there to make sure that the experience of making this movie is one that people will enjoy, that they'll be excited about, that they're going to want to show up on day 2 and actually get back into it with some enthusiasm. A side tip here, day 1 of production, you will always run behind. Always. There is always a learning curve. Even when you have the most experienced crew in the world, day 1 is always fucked. Basically, it's like flipping your first pancake in a batch. It's always gonna look weird. And what you have to try and accept on day 1 is that you're gonna do the best you can and maybe schedule a lighter day on that first day just to make it easily accomplished, so you guys can check off a win at the start of the shoot and go straight into day 2 because you got a lot ahead of you. So lead by example, greet people when you go by, talk to people, and just make sure that there's a general sense of energy and cohesiveness on set, because everyone's supposed to be gathering around you. And it might not be in your nature to be that person. You might not be the most, jokey, charismatic people person in the world, but you kind of have to be at least a little bit to bring people along with you. It's all about communicating. I mean, many aspects of filmmaking are purely about communicating, but I would say chief among them is directing, because you have to be able to talk to all of these different department heads and speak all of their different languages and know how to communicate with them in a way that will make sense to them. Because trying to explain what an audio op is telling, the set designer about, oh, actually we can't have this, this piece hanging down so far because I have to move my boom pole across frame because we have a really long camera movement. You have to be able to explain that to both those people individually in a way that's going to make sense to them. There's other examples of that, but basically knowing how to be a communicator, an open communicator, is a big deal. And if that doesn't feel like how you are naturally, the only way to really get that down is to just put yourself in those environments and learn and practice and get better at it. Ultimately, a lot of this stuff is going to come down to just do it. Just do it yourself, and you might screw it up, but then you'll know better for next time. So the number one thing that I didn't know for For the first several productions I did in LA, when I was starting to learn more about what it is to actually be a filmmaker and not just a guy who runs around with a camera and tells stories. And this is so nebulous to people who haven't done movie making before, who are still figuring out, especially when you're working with other people. Like if you go from working just by yourself or with a tiny team, maybe it's you and the actors, to actually working with a crew of people. How do you do it? What do you show up and think about? How do you have to plan your day? What are the literal steps from start to finish? So here's what you do. You have a call time. This is when everyone's supposed to show up. Usually there's a crew call, and then a little bit later than that, there's a talent call, because the crew is going to have to load in. They're going to have to set their gear up. They're going to have to get situated, and then the talent will show up, and you can actually start your day. Once everybody's there, the crew's loaded in, you're going to have to tell everyone where's the first scene. And sometimes you're the only one who knows this. Sometimes you've brought the cinematographer, but where are we shooting? Are you shooting multiple scenes in a day? If so, where are you starting? This is where our first scene is. Let's say it's that diner scene, right? We have two people sitting at a diner talking. So we're going to be at this booth right here, and we're going to have the windows as background, right? So immediately you've set up your line, right? Your 180 degree line, which is basically if you have two subjects, that's the simplest version. You have, Chad and Joan, and they're talking to each other. If you draw a line between the two of them, they're facing each other, that's your line, your 180 degree line, which means that anything in a 180 degree angle on one side of that line, anywhere is where you can put your camera and have it make sense. In the film world, in film language, if you put your camera anywhere on this side of the line pointing at a subject, the audience will understand spatially what's happening in your scene. If you jump that line, if you go on the other side of the line for a shot or two, and you try and cut it into your footage in the edit, you'll start to notice really jarring edits where basically Joan and Chad's faces are both pointing the same direction when you cut back and forth between them. And it doesn't look right. Like they should look like they're facing each other, right? So that's our scene. This is where we're shooting it. First thing you do, tell people that, get the actors, and while the crew is loading in and getting their gear set up, and you'll come up with like a base camp, you don't usually have to do that. You can tell your crew to figure out their best situation. Sometimes the AD will help them with that, whatever. Sometimes that's you. Get your actors there, and before they've done any like hair and makeup, whatever, before they do all of that extra stuff, rehearse the scene. Some actors aren't too into rehearsal. Sometimes they don't want to over rehearse, but sometimes they love it. And so you kind of have to get a sense of what your actors are looking for, how much rehearsal they want to do. But this is where you start to incorporate the technicality of filmmaking into the scene itself. So the actors are only going to be concerned with what feels right for the character and the flow of the scene. But you also have to be considering, what's our blocking here? Blocking is where are you moving your actors, and how does the camera move with them? Does it move at all? Maybe it doesn't. But the blocking is sort of that relationship between actors and camera that creates a film and creates a shot. So as you rehearse the scene with your actors, keep in mind where they're walking to. Are they staying in place? Do you have somebody entering the scene to sit down in the booth, or do you just cut in with them already in the booth? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe you're cutting straight into the scene in media res and it's already in mid-step, or maybe you do need somebody to enter and exit at the start and finish. And we call that a clean exit or a clean entrance, where even if you think you might not need an entrance or an exit for a shot, like if it's at the end of a scene, so many times in the edit, you'll find yourself going, fuck, I need to extend this out some more. Somehow I need a little bit more time here for the music to play out, whatever. I wish I had had the actor just leave the scene at the end and clear frame, basically go from on frame off. And that is a clean exit. Sometimes you really need those things, and usually you will never kick yourself for having shot it. It's always good to just have. So you set up, you block the scene with your actors, you have them go through it, and once you have it worked out, bring the crew to set to watch them. You don't need the whole crew necessarily, but you definitely need the cinematographer and the sound person. Bare minimum, those two people need to watch the scene as you've arranged it. Sometimes they'll point things out if it seems like there might be a problem area, like, oh, I can't actually get my boom here or whatever, or cinematographer says, ugh, we're gonna get some really nasty flare. Can we adjust it to the next booth over, which actually has blinds down? Stuff like that might come up. But they need to watch the scene in its entirety so that they can understand what's gonna be done. Because what you'll forget a lot of times is that you're the only one who actually knows this stuff. And just getting it out into the world and communicating it to the other people on set is a big deal. That is 90% of your job, is just communicating really clearly, this is what we're gonna do, and this is what we're gonna do afterwards. So once you've shown everybody the scene, you can talk to the cinematographer about your next shot, send the actors to hair and makeup, and wardrobe if they're not in wardrobe. They will go, they'll start getting ready, and this is a really cathartic process for an actor. Usually it feels really nice to be taken care of, and you're having your hair done and your makeup, and you talk to makeup artists who are always usually really personable, and it's kind of a ritual for them to sort of clear their heads and get into their minds and go over their lines together. While they're doing that, get a time estimate from your hair and makeup people. How long is this going to take roughly? Don't push them on it, because people don't like to be pushed, especially first thing in the morning. Get an estimate. This is also something your AD might do. This is where some of those job overlaps come into play. But this is how you tell your cinematographer, hey, this is how much time we have to do this first shot. Usually the first shot of your day is going to be a master shot. Like, if you had to leave set after the first shot because some disaster happens and you only have one shot of your scene, do you still have your whole scene? That's usually why you start with a master shot. Also, the other function of a master shot is to establish the space, to bring people into your world. It's not essential, you don't have to do it, but it's one of those basics that you probably should do. And the cinematographer will start lighting this master shot, and you will establish all of your themes for the day. Like if you have, light coming in from the window, but the cinematographer says, oh, I really want a really strong key light on one side. And so actually we're gonna make it like the sun is coming in from an angle, right? And then they're gonna start putting their lights up that way. And for the rest of the day, everyone kind of knows that that's now your lighting scheme, if you haven't already figured that stuff out. Cinematographer starts setting up, and now you kind of have a break. Your crew is working, and your actor is going through hair and makeup, and now's a time where there's usually a lull. You can take a short break if you want, but really the most important part is to make sure that your AD is keeping check on everybody. Every 5 minutes, try not to do it too much. You might have to do this yourself if you don't have an AD. If you do, and I recommend you should have one, have them make sure that everybody's basically on schedule, because this is the part where people are off doing their own thing, and they're just gonna keep doing their own thing and taking their own time and making everything perfect and tweaking, especially the cinematographer. If he and his gaffer and his team are working on lighting, they can tweak that endlessly. They will spend as much time as you give them on the lighting, because there's always something a little bit more that you can do. And so you need to use your time estimate from hair and makeup to make sure that everything everyone's being kept honest, and that you're ultimately moving towards that first shot, because the only person who's gonna force that first shot to happen is you. Your AD should do this, and that just depends on how good they are, and there are a lot of not so great ADs out there, and it's this fine line between being annoyingly persistent about checking in on time, but also being like being amiable and conversational and keeping things light, because people will get pressured if you check in too quickly. And also relaying that amount of time to other people. All of the departments, everybody needs to know what's happening. And usually people need to know what's happening next too. That's a little bit more advanced, and that's where you can work with your AD, but make sure that you're communicating, okay, this master shot is first, then we're gonna go into coverage of Joan. So we know that she's next and Chad's gonna be off screen for that next setup, right? And if you tell people those two things, they will be unbelievably grateful. Because they now have a sense of where your day is going, and they feel on board, and they feel included, and they feel like they can start preparing. If everyone's just reacting in the moment to what's coming next and what's next, okay, this is the thing, and now this is the thing, it's gonna feel like you're always behind, even if you're not, because you're always reacting to what's in the moment. And so being prepared is hugely advantageous. Once people are out of hair and makeup, get them to set right away. Maybe they'll need a little drink, a little snack, whatever. If you want to hit up Crafty on the way over, the actors are going to start getting into their mindset. Now you bring them back in, and you have the camera set up, you have the cinematographer, maybe you've had some stand-ins so you can get the lighting really dialed in, and now you have the actors do the scene one more time, just to make sure that everybody is totally aware of what's happening. And this is where some final tweaks might happen. The cinematographer might say, oh, I kind of fucked up the exposure here, I need 2 minutes, whatever. These are some last tweaks. Your sound gear should have been set up by your sound operator somewhere between hair and makeup and set. Somewhere between those two places. If you have lavalier mics that are going on, body mics, any of that stuff should be done after wardrobe, before you get to set. And you do the scene one last time. If you have marks, for instance, if somebody's moving from one place to the next, you put tape marks down, shaped like a T, on the floor where they have to hit their mark. And that's basically just going from one place to the next. On your one means get back to first position. Whatever the very first place is that an actor starts their scene, that's their one. If you have a camera movement, also the same thing applies. You don't have tape marks on the ground, but when you say on your ones, everyone back to one, that means we're doing a full reset. Everybody start over. Whatever it is that you have to do during the scene, go all the way back to the start. Then you have basically the opportunity to do your first take. And again, this is where either a really good AD will push people into it, or you have to do it yourself. One or both. Nobody else is going to take that initiative for you, and you will lose lots of time, especially on that very first setup, if nobody's actually saying, hey, let's do it. Let's just do a take. And sometimes you have to just throw it out there in a really casual way, because people need to be invited into that. A lot of times people will just waste their time. They'll try and get their lines per, they'll try and do this. The cinematographer's like, I don't know, maybe I should swing a lens. This is maybe a little too wide. Let's just do a take and see how it looks. Great. So actors get on their marks, camera gets set, sound op needs to find his place, sound op needs to find a boom line, a frame line. Basically, this microphone needs to not be in frame. And so the sound op needs to make sure that wherever he's placing himself, it's gonna be done without dropping into the frame. And so then either your AD or you, it kind of depends on how experienced the AD is and how on top of it they are, will say, all right, let's get set up for a take. Can I get slate in? Slate in is usually the universal sign for, hey, we're doing this, get ready. And whoever has your slate, usually it's like the second AC or PA, whoever you have available to literally just hold it and snap it. Vaguely, whatever millimeter lens it is, so let's say it's a 24 millimeter lens, have the slate about 24 inches away from the camera. Roughly speaking, that's a pretty good way to sort of have the slate very clearly in frame where it's not too far away and tiny for anyone to read. Your second AC will for sure know that already. Inexperienced people doing the slate would not know that. Have it in, say roll sound, you'll hear sound speed, roll cameras, you'll hear speeding, and then you say mark it, and then get the hell out of there. Whoever's doing the slate, clear set. I had one guy running a slate one time. God bless him. He was in film school, still learning, and he was the slowest slate ever. And sometimes when you have a scene, like that whole procedure ramping up to action, the actor is sitting there working themselves into the right mindset, and they're getting prepared because they know they have to go as soon as action is called. They don't get the choice over that. The director does. And so they are preparing, and if there's one person that everybody is waiting on to just get the fuck out of the shot, it's gonna really ruin your timing and your pacing. As soon as you say slate in, there's a timer going in everybody's heads. Okay, we are expecting to be rolling and in the middle of a take within a minute, let's say. And if that takes longer, people get antsy, they'll lose the moment, whatever. So you have to kind of keep it moving. Get the slate out of there, and then once you're set, one thing that I used to do, which I think was actually a mistake, and I had an actor tell me this at one point, I would ask the actors, hey, are you ready? Or, actor set or whatever. Like I would have some way of asking the actors if they were ready. Don't do that. Unless somebody specifically requests that you do that, don't do it. For me, I was being overly careful, and I wanted to make sure everyone was ready. But what I was actually doing was I was breaking their concentration. So just assume that as soon as you are slating your film, the actor is gonna hear that and they're gonna know this is time to get into spot. Assume that they're gonna be ready. And if they do actually need like a few seconds, they might take those seconds after you call action anyway. You know, they'll do it if they need it. You can say, you know, ask your camera if they're ready. If there's a camera move that has to happen, or like a rack focus or some timing thing, panning, you can make sure that your camera is framed properly. You say camera set, your cinematographer, your camera operator will say set. Now it's on you. Call action. I usually like to call it loudly and clearly because you never know if somebody's gonna miss it. And if one person is in the middle of a scene and somebody else didn't hear you say action, that's a problem that is easily avoided by just being loud and clear, okay? And it's like a starting gun. It's a command. It's giving people permission to just take off and go. Action. It's great. Obviously, if you're in the middle of a really sort of delicate scene or a soft moment, try and match your energy to what's happening in the scene. That's another good piece of advice. It's very simple. It's very easy to do. You know, if you're in this close-up moment with an actor who's like right in, their face is like right in the camera in this intense close-up, action. As long as they can hear you, as long as everyone can hear you, try and match the mood of what's happening. You're gonna go through your take, and at the end of your take, you have a few options. You can say cut, great, everybody cuts the recording, it's saved, it's locked, it's great, now you're gonna reset, or you're gonna move on. What happens though is that if you cut, all of that procedure that you had to do to start your take has to get done all over again for the next one. If you have a note in your mind already, you've been watching your take, watch the monitor. I made this mistake too when I was starting out. I would watch the scene. I would just watch the actors right in front of me because I wasn't used to watching a monitor. I was used to either running the camera, or just working with actors like in theater. And the cinematographer actually had to tell me like, hey, watch the monitor. Like, this is your shot here. Like whatever the actors are doing in your scene, if it doesn't look right in your monitor, you're the one who has to say, hey, this doesn't quite look right. So watch the monitor. Try and have if your audio op has a contact like headset that you can wear to hear the actual mic feed, that's great. If not, just try and keep an ear out for what the actors are doing and saying. But if at the end of your take you already have a note in mind, maybe just say, okay, and keep rolling. We're gonna reset to 1 and just do one more. That just means literally what it sounds like, but instead of cutting, we're gonna go back to 1 and just go straight into another take. And sometimes those kind of rolling scenes can be really good because it gets everybody into a flow, especially if there's any kind of complexity, if there's a performance thing that needs an energetic build up to it, if there's a camera move that we just haven't quite gotten down, sometimes just going straight into another take is actually really helpful. However, whoever is editing your movie, and especially if you've hired an assistant editor, it can become problematic to just have rolling takes and rolling takes. Or if you're editing the movie and you're like, wait, I know we did this somewhere, but that rolling take is all in, shot 2B pickup, shot 2B take 3 pickup. If you have 5 rolling takes hidden in that one shot, you might not remember that. And so cutting is also a way to stay organized. There's just sort of a balance there. So you watch your scene, what the hell do you do? Maybe it doesn't hit you right, or you don't see it, or whatever you came up with in rehearsal doesn't work, or maybe you don't know what to say at all. Great, good job everybody. Let's reset and we're gonna do one more. All you have to do. That's basically a great stall tactic because now you get an entire other take to start thinking about any kind of notes you want to give. Sometimes an actor will ask you, hey, was that okay? Like, do you think I should do anything different? Most of the time, that means that they are uncertain of their own performance and they need guidance. They need your direction. They need to know, how is this coming across? And they don't always need to be given some kind of note, but I find that usually if an actor is asking for your feedback, they want a note. They want you to help them make a choice. And sometimes all it takes is for you to say, look, I thought that was a really good start. I just need you to push a little more. I just need you to like dig into it more, like hit it harder. The actors respond to notes differently, but that's another really like oblique thing to try and describe. Like, there is a such thing as giving terrible notes, and most of your notes can fall into that category very easily. actors are all different, and so it also becomes about working with specific different actors, personalities, whatever their techniques are. They'll have their own techniques and ways of doing things. Like I said, some actors hate rehearsing. Some actors require rehearsing, and you have to work around those two constraints. But when you're giving notes to somebody, avoid line readings right off the bat. A line reading is like, you think you can hear it in your head like this, like, God damn it, Chad, I wish you would just stop. You hear it exactly like that in your head, and the actor's not saying it that way. Joan is just not giving me that. Do not give her a line reading. Don't say it the way that you hear it in your head. That is massively disrespectful to the actors. And on top of that, it will never, ever come out as good as they will do it on their own if they're in the moment. Another way of saying, like, you've hired that actor for a reason. You're not playing the part. No matter how you hear it in your head, they are. And if you can get them as an actor in the moment to do a brilliant, authentic performance, whatever it is that they say in their way will always be better than how you hear it in your head. So don't give line readings. Please don't do that. Sometimes an actor will get frustrated with a process that's going too slowly, and you've done 10 takes already, and they're like, just give me a line reading. And then it's okay. Maybe it's not okay because they've gotten frustrated and you're not communicating well, but if they ask you to do it, you can do it. So you see something in their performance that you don't like. They're hitting the wrong emotion. Maybe they're doing it too early. Maybe they're getting angry right out the gate. That's a very classic kind of acting mistake, is like the character is supposed to get angry during a scene and they just go straight on for full anger. And you're like, this, you see the flow in your head. You're like, no, actually, we have to start the scene here and then do a slow build up to that shouting. And they're just going like, and then going across. And you're like, no, we need to, so how do you get that across? And you say, hold on to that. Like, you're going to get angry. Absolutely. This is a fucking horrible thing she's saying to you. Like, this, after all that you two have been through, like, absolutely, this is the right, so encourage them that they're going the right direction, but say, suppress it. You don't want to show her that card. Like, you don't want to bare yourself that quickly. You don't want to snap that early. Hold on to it as long as you can. And if you make it a game, is not really the right term, but if you turn it into a decision-making process that digs into the authenticity of being in the moment, allowing them to make the choice of when to explode. For instance, you've told them, hold on to it, so that you now get your, like, I just don't want it to happen too soon. I want it to keep going over here. And now they get the choice to just stay in touch with how they feel in the scene during the moment, holding on to that rage until finally he comes out, and that will be exciting for an actor to explore. And they may not get it right every time. They may not hit it exactly the way that you imagined, but now you're encouraging them to stay in the moment with a note that is, and here's where it gets tough with notes. You have to be vague enough that you're not writing their character's performance for them, because it's not your job. It's the actor's job to act. But you have to be specific enough that they are not confused by what you mean. There's no really bulletproof way to do this, especially with the different ways that people like to communicate and interact and do their own jobs. You kind of just have to get a feel for it. But more often than not, I would say that a vague note is more frustrating than an overly specific note. If you say something that is so vague, like, for instance, here's a great example of a vague note. Be angrier. What the fuck does that mean? Be angrier. Like, people know what it means, but it makes the assumption that an actor is just conjuring emotions out of thin air to be whatever they need to be in a moment, and that's not how acting works. Acting is about living in a moment and letting it build and grow naturally, and if all of the pieces have been put in place, like the writing is there and your scene partner is there with you and the directing has created the entire moment for everyone to live in, it will happen naturally and authentically, and the actor will push where they need to go. Be angrier is incredibly unhelpful. Be any emotion is incredibly unhelpful. If you need someone to get to a certain place, you have to have a reason for it. You have to say, okay, Chad's getting way too angry way too early. Okay, fine. Okay, so I want him to explode at a certain part in the script. Maybe you say, she's needling you, and it is frustrating, but you're not gonna blow up just yet, because it's not until she says, you know, you slept with your sister or my sister, whatever. It's not until she says this one thing later on in the scene, this one line of dialogue, and now you can take that and say, this is the thing that sets him off. And he will then take that and go, okay, I get that. That sets him off. So everything up until that point is like simmering and like stewing on what she's saying, and then that is like a fuse that gets lit. Great. And now he's going to be angrier in that moment just by virtue of the fact that you have led him to it in a different way that makes sense from a character perspective. Ultimately, the best way to think about giving notes is that it is manipulation. To give a note on something, to sort of convince somebody into a different, because a note is inherently correcting. It's saying, you didn't quite get it right, here's a way to do it differently or better, or the way that I want it. And it's about communicating that in a way that an actor will be inspired by. And by the way, actors want notes by and large. Not every actor, maybe if there's an ego involved, that's not necessarily true, but an actor would much rather have a set of notes to work with. What the fuck is that? Somebody's vacuuming. Hopefully that's not too audible. It's distracting though. So an actor would much rather have a specific set of notes to work with and feedback to give them the direction they need to go than nothing at all. Because if they have nothing at all, they feel lost, because it is, in a sense, pure creation. You're just sitting down and coming up with this stuff. And if they're throwing things out there in the scene that you're not giving them any feedback on what's good or bad, they're gonna flounder, usually, unless an actor gets it into their mind that they need to like save their performance and like, oh my god, this movie's gonna be so bad, I just need to like take control over my own thing because nobody else is helping me. In that case, there are many other things that are wrong anyway. They're gonna want some level of feedback to know that they're going in the right direction. So you need to give them the kind of feedback that is gonna manipulate them into believing that they're doing better than they were when you started, and into believing that everybody, including them, is building towards the same point. And leading that horse to water happens 100 different times in 100 different ways. And it's kind of just about trying things out and seeing what works. Avoid saying be insert an emotion here. Avoid giving line readings. And if you don't have anything, but you weren't happy with the take and you can't figure out why, just say, hey, do we have time for another one? Yeah, let's do another one. Sometimes you can invite them to play with it. An actor won't necessarily be on board for that, but a lot of times they will be. A lot of times they've done 2 or 3 takes your way, and they kind of feel like, hey, and they might ask you, hey, like, can I try it like this? Or can I do this? And it might be completely opposite from how you imagined the scene going. But if they're excited about it, they're gonna give you something new and something full of a certain kind of energy that will be valuable to have in your edit. It may not be right, but if not, who cares? You've wasted, 2 minutes on it? Do the take, let them explore it, because hey, maybe you were wrong and it's brilliant. And then you have something brilliant. Everybody wins there. If not, maybe you wasted a little bit of time, but even in that scenario, you have now been a collaborator that the actor can trust to ask for stuff. The actor can say, okay, I can make my own suggestions. Sometimes they'll take that too far and you have to kind of keep them in check. But a lot of times they'll appreciate the collaboration because filmmaking is inherently collaborative, at least a little bit and usually a lot. And so if you create a spirit and an environment in which people can make suggestions and you can say yes or no, they will feel open to exploring more and they will go for it. And you do have to be careful about how much of those suggestions you take in. Sometimes you do not have time for it. Sometimes you just have to move on and you have to just say, I'm really sorry. I absolutely want to do this kind of thing with you, but we're already like 30 minutes behind and like we just had to do like 2 takes on this scene for safety and then move straight into the next thing and we'll get it next time. Something like that. And usually people will understand that because filmmaking, again, it's all about time. How much time do you have to do the things you want to do? Create that collaborative spirit and people will appreciate it. And that applies to everybody on set too. Everybody is there with their own creative ideas. Everybody is there because they love making movies. The cinematographer will have their own ideas about shots. And a lot of times if this is about being a visionary director and you have a shot list and you have this brilliant oneer that you want to do, that a lot of people like to tackle the oneer, which is basically a single take, an unbroken take of an entire scene or sequence of scenes, depending on how complicated it is. And a lot of times it involves camera movement and complex blocking. The Spielberg oneer is a term because Spielberg is famous for being brilliant at doing these different types of oneers. But basically, it's a very complex technique that actually incorporates many techniques into creating a scene that can be brilliant, and it can super fail too. It can be quite bad. In fact, it's likelier that it's going to be on the not as good side of things unless you are really skilled and you guys have time to rehearse it enough. Because oneers work because you did a bunch of them, and eventually people got there and hit it all perfectly. And by the way, if you spend a day or if you spend a bunch of time setting up a oneer, this happened to me on a feature that I was the cinematographer, and I was working with a writer-producer who wasn't a visionary director. He didn't have a literal vision of the movie. He just sort of put it all on me and said, come up with my shots. I was like, great, I'll do that. And I didn't do this a lot, but there were a couple fairly simple, like one-page scenes that I was like, it would be great to do this in a oneer. And the trick with oneers is that it takes a long time to set up and rehearse. And you will start to feel like, oh, like we're running out of time. Like we weren't supposed to spend this much time on one shot, because usually a shot is 20 minutes out of your day. And if you're setting up a oneer and it's taking 20 minutes just to rehearse it, and then they're longer shots because you're not doing segments of a scene, you're doing in the entire scene, and they take longer to shoot them, you have to double down on it. You have to do enough of them that people can get it into their muscle memory, because they're doing a long sequence of complicated different steps, hitting different marks, pulling focus, the lighting has to be there, whatever. The performance has to be there, the timing and the performance has to be there, because you can't edit them later. And so your editing is in directing the actors and the camera to be perfect when it comes to timing. Take the time to rehearse it, do a bunch of takes, because you're there, you've set up for it. And the actual shooting of the take is far less consequential than the time that it took you to set up the take. You spent 45 minutes setting up and rehearsing. It doesn't make any sense to spend only 10 minutes shooting takes and then go, well, we gotta move on, let's go. Get it down, because you're knocking out an entire scene with this one shot. Put the time in and make sure that you walk away with at least one take that you're happy with. But for instance, if you're setting up that oneer and your cinematographer says, hey, like, I know that you wanna do this like moving, like handheld camera movement on an 80mm, but like it's gonna be so hard to get the focus right on something like that on a longer lens. Please consider maybe going out to like a 50, something a little bit wider where it'll be a little easier to keep people in focus and a little bit easier to move around handheld without having too much shake and too much focus drift. And now you can either say yes or no. You can say, no, I really had this vision of like, okay, it's gotta be this really tight shot with a super shallow depth of field. Great, but he or she has raised concern with you that this focusing might be a problem. So maybe instead of moving the camera around handheld, maybe the camera stays in one spot and pans and rack focuses. And now you've simplified your shot while still getting a lot of the same effects of that movement and that handheld. And now you've collaborated with your DP, who is saying, hey, basically in code, it's gonna be way too hard to knock this shot out the way that you have it described. Can we do it this way? Be collaborative in that sense. I think there's so much more to say, and I can't say it all in this ginormously long video. So we'll come back to this. I'll revisit the same subjects in other videos related to directing. The last thing I'll leave you with, if you're a visionary, you need to know about camera and lighting. You just have to. If you're gonna be that specific about your shots, you just have to know some of that stuff. So a few tips about camera and lighting. You don't have to know exact lenses. You don't have to know. It's helpful if you do know them. You can talk to your cinematographer a lot easier if you actually know focal lengths and all that stuff and the different properties of lenses. But basically, here are some tips to be aware of. Wider shots are great for establishing your space. A wider lens is great for that. Close-ups mean, look at this. This is really important. and a close-up will intensify whatever is on screen. If it's somebody's face, then whatever motion they're displaying will be intense. If it's an insert of an important prop, look at this, pay attention to this. Which is why if you overuse close-ups, it can get really agitating for an audience, and it can start to feel kind of cheap. Like if you're saying everything's important and everything gets a close-up, suddenly it doesn't mean anything at all. So try and use a variety of shots. Some people have different opinions about that, but basically understand what you're saying when you use all close-ups. Conversely, if you use all wide shots, people might not latch on to specific pieces of information that they need to know. Like if in your wide shot one-er take of your scene, you have, somebody's supposed to check their watch and see what time it is, and you have them check their watch kind of in frame like this. Well, great, like you saw them check their watch, but maybe you didn't actually see what the watch said on it. So maybe that's a perfect time to shoot a close-up of it. And by the way, this is a trick for breaking up one-ers where you can still shoot them well, but if you put that watch check right in the middle of it, now you have an edit point. And now you don't actually have to nail your one-er all in one. Now you have a way to get the best of the first half and the best of the second half. Consider it. It's worth thinking about. And as far as camera movement goes, I mean, there's so much to say here, and I'll do a whole other video about that when it comes to cinematography. But basically, if you want to move your camera forwards or backwards, a good way to exaggerate or display that forward, that in and out movement is with a wider lens. That's how you can get that sort of spatial distortion that really makes it feel like you're moving through the space. On the flip side, if you're going side to side, and this also applies to panning, a longer lens, a longer focal length like an 85 or 100 millimeter or 200 millimeter, whatever, will exaggerate that movement. In fact, a lot of times people, you shoot a scene in a forest where somebody's like running through the forest. A lot of times those are shot on a really long lens, and the camera's not actually moving, then the camera's not tracking with the actor at all. A lot of times if it's a long enough lens, the camera's just panning. But because it's so zoomed in, it gives the illusion of just tracking alongside the actor as they sprint through the forest. And as long as you create a path for the actor that is curved around the camera, there you go. I mean, you can't do it forever because your lighting will change. If you have sunlight and they run around to the other side, it'll become obvious. But it's a little trick, it's a little hack, because that panning motion on a long lens becomes very exaggerated to the point that it's like whipping through a space. Oh, there's so much else to say. Okay, I gotta stop. I gotta stop this video. It's already too long. I get really excited about this stuff because I love filmmaking, and I specifically love directing. I promise I'll come back. There's so much more to say, and I'm gonna try and parcel it out to videos that are relevant to the different subjects. So like, I'm not gonna get too much into camera stuff when I can do a cinematography video. I'm not gonna get too much into running a set when I can do an assistant directing video. I'll probably do another one of these about the writer-producer style director. But yeah, this is sort of the crash course. Like if you're gonna walk on set and you need to know what to do, this is how you start. Okay. Gotta stop. Gotta get me some coffee. I have work to do after this. Okay, so thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. These crash courses are definitely meant to be much more about the nitty-gritty, things that you typically would only learn from just being on set and getting it done yourself. And hopefully this helps you make your movie a little bit better than you would have if you hadn't watched it. So please like and subscribe if you want to see more of these. I have other series that I have going on. I have top 5 tips, and then I also have a series of mistakes, which is about my old shorts and what I did wrong and right and how to learn from my mistakes. So with that, we'll see you next time.